Learn the art of silencing your mind. Inner Steel, YouTube script. The first thought you had this morning, was it yours? Or was it fear wearing your voice? Most men wake up and immediately hand their mind over to everything that went wrong yesterday, everything that could go wrong today, and everyone who has ever doubted them. Before their feet hit the floor, the war inside has already begun. And they spend the rest of the day losing it. This video is not about peace. Peace is a word that's been softened, domesticated, made into something you hang on a wall. This is about something harder. This is about command, the ability to stand inside a storm of noise and say, not today. This is the ancient art of silencing your mind, and it has been practiced by warriors, emperors, prisoners, and monks, all of whom discovered that the man who masters his inner world cannot be defeated by the outer one. If you've ever felt like your own thoughts were the enemy, if you've ever lain awake at 2 a.m. being tried, convicted, and executed by your own mind, this is for you. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to hear might be the most important thing no one ever taught you. And if this kind of content speaks to you, the real work, the deep work, the work most men are too afraid to start, subscribe to Inner Steel. This channel exists for the man who refuses to stay at war with himself. The first point, understand what the noise actually is. Before you can silence anything, you have to understand what you're dealing with. Most men think the noise in their heads is the truth. They think those racing thoughts, those worst-case scenarios, those replays of embarrassing moments from 3 years ago, they think all of that is wisdom. They think if they're worrying, they're being responsible. If they're overthinking, they're being thorough. If they can't stop replaying a conversation, they must be learning something. They are not. The noise is not wisdom. The noise is the nervous system doing what it was built to do: scan for threats, prepare for danger, keep you alive in a world that no longer requires that level of vigilance. The ancient mind was designed for a world of lions and hunger, and enemy tribes. It was not designed for performance reviews, social media comments, or relationship arguments. But no one told your brain that. So it keeps running the same ancient threat detection software on modern problems, and it breaks everything it touches. Here is the story of a man who understood this before almost anyone else in recorded history. His name was Epictetus. He was a slave. Not metaphorically, literally a slave, owned by a man named Epaphroditus in Rome, who at one point broke Epictetus's leg for amusement, reportedly while Epictetus watched him do it, and said calmly, "You are going to break it." And when it snapped, he said, "Did I not tell you?" No rage. No collapse. No noise. How? Because Epictetus had drawn a line, not in sand but in iron, between what was in his control and what was not. He had decided, with absolute clarity, that his body belonged to his master. But his mind? His mind belonged to no one. He called it the dichotomy of control. And it is the foundation of inner silence. When the noise comes, and it will come, the first question is not, "How do I make this stop?" The first question is this mine to carry? Most of what breaks men down is not theirs to carry. They are carrying the weight of other people's opinions, the anxiety of outcomes they cannot control, the shame of a past they cannot change. The noise grows loudest when you're holding things that were never yours. Put them down. This is not spiritual advice. This is mechanical. When a man identifies the source of a thought and asks whether that thought belongs to the realm of his control, something shifts. The thought doesn't disappear, but it loses authority. It stops being the truth and becomes what it always was, a signal from a frightened nervous system that has not yet been updated. Epictetus walked out of slavery and went on to teach philosophy to emperors. The man who could not control his own freedom became one of the greatest teachers of inner freedom who ever lived. Not because he silenced the chaos of the world. Because he learned that the world outside was never the problem. The noise is not the truth. The noise is old software running on a new machine. The first step to silencing your mind is understanding what the mind actually is, and refusing to confuse its alarm systems for its wisdom. The second point, stop trying to win the argument with yourself. Here is the mistake almost every man makes the moment he decides to work on his mind: he tries to fight it. He hears a thought he doesn't like and he argues back. He hears, "You're going to fail." And he responds with, "No, I'm not." He hears, "She doesn't respect you." And he rehearses comebacks. He hears, "You're not enough." And he pulls out evidence to the contrary. He turns his own mind into a courtroom, and then spends every waking hour in trial. And here is the brutal truth: you cannot win that trial. Not because the thoughts are right, but because the act of arguing gives them power. Every debate you have with a dark thought is a vote that the thought deserves your attention. And the mind, ancient, pattern-seeking, relentless, will keep producing thoughts that receive attention. You are feeding the noise by fighting it. In 1944, a young Austrian psychiatrist was transported to Auschwitz. His name was Viktor Frankl. He had already lost his manuscript, the work of years, when it was confiscated on arrival. He would go on to lose his wife, his mother, his brother. He stood naked in a freezing room while guards mocked him, waiting to learn whether he would be sent to the labor camp or the gas chamber. And in that moment, he made a discovery that would shape the rest of his life. He could not stop what was happening. He could not argue his way out. He could not fight the guards or the circumstances or the machinery of death around him. But he could choose, and here is the word he used, he could choose his response to what was happening. Not the feelings. Not the fear. But the orientation of his inner life. He stopped arguing with reality and started observing it. This is what the art of inner silence actually requires, not combat, but observation. When a dark thought arrives, the trained mind does not debate it. It watches it. It names it. There is the thought that I will fail. There is the thought that I am not loved. There is the fear of being forgotten. Watch it like a man watching clouds. You are not the cloud. You are the sky. The sky does not argue with the weather. It simply remains. Frankl survived. He rebuilt. He wrote one of the most important books of the 20th century from those fragments of insight found in the most inhuman conditions imaginable. He did not survive because he was stronger than his circumstances. He survived because he refused to hand his inner life over to them. Stop trying to win the argument with yourself. The moment you stop engaging the noise as an enemy, it begins to lose its grip. Not because you've defeated it, but because you've denied it the one thing it needs to survive, your full, frightened, fighting attention. Observe. Name. Release. That is the sequence. 3 steps that every man who has ever achieved inner silence learned, one way or another, sometimes the hardest way imaginable. The third point, build a mind that can bear silence. Here is something most men have never been told: silence is uncomfortable because you have trained yourself to avoid it. From the moment you wake up, there is noise. The phone. The news. The music in the car. The podcast during the workout. The television in the background at dinner. The scroll before sleep. Modern man has constructed an almost perfect system for never having to be alone with himself, and then he wonders why, the moment things go quiet, the walls close in. You are not afraid of silence. You are afraid of what silence reveals. In the spring of 1654, a French mathematician and philosopher named Blaise Pascal wrote a sentence that has echoed through centuries. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. He wrote that before smartphones, before television, before radio, before newspapers were common. He saw, in an era of relative quiet by modern standards, that even then, men would do anything to avoid the inner confrontation that stillness demands. Because in silence, the accounting happens. The question you've been drowning out with noise comes forward. Are you becoming who you said you would become? Are you living in alignment with what you know to be right? Are you honest with yourself about what you want and what you fear? These are not comfortable questions. Which is why most men never ask them. They keep the noise running. They call it productivity. They call it staying informed. They call it entertainment. But underneath the noise, in that quiet room Pascal wrote about, the man they're trying to become is waiting, and slowly losing patience. There is a practice that the Stoics called prosoke, which roughly translates as attention to the self. Every evening, Marcus Aurelius would sit alone and review the day. Not to punish himself. Not to replay his failures on loop. But to observe, honestly and without drama, where his character had been tested, where he had held, and where he had not. He called it the inner citadel, the inviolable fortress of the self that no external force could breach, but that neglect could quietly hollow out from within. Building a mind that can bear silence means practicing silence. Starting with small exposures. 5 minutes of sitting without a phone, without music, without input. Not meditating in the formal sense necessarily, just sitting. Being. Allowing the noise to rise as it will, and watching it without giving it fuel. Most men who try this the first time panic within 60 seconds. The thoughts flood in. The to-do list screams. The regrets parade. The anxieties sharpen. And the man reaches for his phone like a man reaching for oxygen. Don't reach. Sit in it. Not forever. Not perfectly. But deliberately. Because every minute you remain in the silence without escaping it, you are retraining the most important muscle you own, your ability to be present with what is, without needing it to be different. That muscle is what separates the man who leads himself from the man who is led by his fears. Build it slowly. Build it daily. And understand that the discomfort of silence is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that you are finally paying attention. The fourth point, master the body to master the mind. No conversation about silencing the mind is complete without this, and most conversations leave it out entirely. You cannot think your way to inner silence. You can understand every concept in this video, recite every quote, agree with every principle, and still lie awake at 3 a.m. drowning in noise. Because the mind is not separate from the body. The mind lives in the body. And if the body is running on dysregulation, on poor sleep, on chronic tension, on shallow breathing, on accumulated physical stress, the mind will reflect that chaos with perfect fidelity. This is not metaphor. This is physiology. When your nervous system is dysregulated, when cortisol is running high, when your breathing is shallow and chest-based, when your muscles are holding tension you're not even aware of, your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reason, perspective, and measured response, goes offline. And your amygdala, the threat detector, the alarm, the ancient panic machine, takes over. And now every thought is colored by threat. Every silence feels dangerous. Every uncertainty feels catastrophic. You are not weak. You are dysregulated. There is a difference. And it can be changed. In the spring of 1970, a young American military trainee named Mark Devine was struggling. He was smart. He was motivated. But in the pressure of intense training, his mind would scatter. He was burning through mental energy fighting his own internal noise during moments that required absolute clarity. His performance suffered. He nearly washed out. He didn't. Instead, he found something that would define his career and eventually his life's work. He learned to breathe on purpose. What Devine discovered, and what decades of subsequent research has confirmed, is that the breath is the only function of the autonomic nervous system that you can consciously control. Your heart rate, your digestion, your hormone release, you cannot directly command these. But your breath you can. And through the breath you reach back into the system. You turn down the alarm. You bring the prefrontal cortex back online. You return to yourself. The method is disarmingly simple. Inhale for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. Hold for 4. Box breathing. 4 rounds. 64 seconds. And the noise, that relentless, battering noise, softens. Not because you've solved anything. Because you've shifted the terrain. You've moved from a dysregulated state to a regulated one. And in that state, the silence has room to exist. This is what warriors do before combat. What surgeons do before difficult procedures. What the most effective leaders in history have practiced in one form or another, not always with a name for it, but always with the intuition that the body and mind are one system and that system must be brought under conscious governance before anything else can be governed. Master the breath. Reduce the physical tension you carry. Sleep like your mind depends on it, because it does. The art of silencing the mind begins in the body. Men who ignore this spend their whole lives trying to outthink a problem that lives below thought. The 5th point, create a philosophy, not just a practice. Here is where most self-improvement content fails you. It gives you techniques without giving you a reason. It says, meditate, breathe, journal, rest, and when you ask why, it says, because it reduces stress. And so you do it for a week, maybe 2, and then the noise wins. Because you have a technique, but you don't have a philosophy. You have a tool, but you don't have a purpose. The men in history who achieved the deepest inner silence were not men who tried a few practices. They were men who adopted a total orientation toward life, a philosophy that governed not just what they did but what they believed about what life was for, what suffering meant, and what kind of man they intended to become. In 121 AD, a boy was born in Spain who would become one of the most powerful men in human history. His name was Marcus Aurelius. By the time he was in his early 40s, he was the Emperor of Rome, ruler of the greatest empire the Western world had ever seen. He commanded armies. He controlled economies. He held the lives of millions in his hands. And yet every morning, before the world demanded anything of him, Marcus sat alone and wrote. Not proclamations. Not strategies. Personal reminders. Private philosophy. The things he had to keep telling himself to stay right, to stay clear, to stay humble, to stay deliberate in the face of power that could have made him monstrous. What he wrote became the Meditations. It was never meant to be published. It was a man talking to himself, trying to stay true to a philosophy that cost him something every day, the philosophy of living according to nature, of doing what reason demands, of accepting what cannot be changed and changing what can. He wrote things like, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." These were not motivational phrases. They were lifelines. They were the things a man at war with the chaos of an empire had to write to himself to remember what mattered. The art of silencing your mind requires that you build something similar. Not a list of practices. A philosophy. A clear, articulated answer to the questions, what is life for? What kind of man am I choosing to become? What do I believe about suffering, loss, failure, and time? Without those answers, every technique is a band-aid on a wound that needs a surgeon. With those answers, every difficulty becomes data. Every moment of noise becomes an invitation to return to what you know to be true. Marcus faced war, plague, betrayal, the death of children, the corruption of people he trusted. He never achieved perfect inner silence. He says so himself, on almost every page. But he returned. Again and again, through philosophy, through his daily practice of self-examination, through the unflinching commitment to a way of thinking about the world that held him upright when everything else buckled. That is what you are building. Not a quiet mind for this week. A philosophy for a lifetime. Subscribe to Inner Steel if this is the kind of thinking you want more of, the deep work, the real philosophy, the ancient wisdom that doesn't expire. This channel exists for the man who is serious about building something permanent. The 6th point, learn to let thoughts pass without being pulled under. There is a difference between having a thought and being that thought. Most men do not know this difference. A thought arrives. I'm going to lose everything. And suddenly that thought is not a thought anymore. It is the truth. It is the future. It is the identity. The man does not have the thought. The thought has him. This is not weakness. This is what happens when you have never been taught to observe the mind from the outside. When the default mode is immersion rather than observation. When you have spent your whole life inside the river instead of ever standing on the bank. The Japanese have a concept that captures this precisely, mushin. It is a term from Zen philosophy and martial arts, and it translates roughly as, no mind, not the absence of thought, but the absence of attachment to thought. The mind moves. Thoughts arise. But the man does not grab onto them. He does not follow them down the corridor of consequence. He lets them pass the way a swordsman watches a blade, aware of it, tracking it, never unnerved by it. Miyamoto Musashi was the greatest swordsman Japan ever produced. He fought over 60 duels and killed in all of them. He was undefeated. And what distinguished him was not speed or strength. There were men faster and stronger than Musashi in Japan. What distinguished him was a quality of mind that his opponents could not match. In the moment of combat, he was completely present and completely still. No fear of death. No attachment to winning. No noise. Just the sword and the space between him and the other man. He wrote about this in the Book of Five Rings. He called it the mind like water, which reflects everything clearly and is disturbed by nothing permanently. You throw a stone into water and it ripples. But the ripples always pass. The surface always returns to stillness. The water does not try to stop the ripple. It does not fight the stone. It simply returns. This is the practice. When a thought arrives, particularly a dark one, a fearful one that brings heat to the chest and weight to the shoulders, you do not grab it. You note it. You name it. There is fear. There is the thought of failure. There is the feeling of being unseen. And then you watch it move. Not away from you, through you. Because thoughts, left unripped, always pass. The man who learns this does not become emotionless. He becomes something rarer, a man whose emotions move through him without controlling him. A man who feels fear but is not governed by fear. A man who feels grief but is not destroyed by grief. A man who feels rage but is not consumed by rage. This is emotional mastery. This is inner silence, not the absence of the storm, but the stillness at its center. The eye of the hurricane is not where the wind is weakest. It is where the wind cannot enter. Become the eye. The seventh point, use pain as a teacher, not an executioner. There is a particular kind of noise that no technique can fully prepare you for, the noise that comes with real loss. The death of something you built. The end of a relationship you believed in. The failure of a dream you sacrificed for. The discovery that you were wrong about something that mattered. This is the noise most men try hardest to escape. And in escaping it, they delay the most important work of their lives. Pain is not punishment. Pain is a signal. And a signal, if you learn to read it instead of flee from it, is information. Possibly the most valuable information you will ever receive. In 1961, a man named James Stockdale was a U.S. Navy pilot. In 1965, his plane was shot down over North Vietnam, and he was captured. He would spend the next 7.5 years as a prisoner of war in the Hanoi Hilton, one of the most brutal detention facilities of the 20th century. He was tortured over 20 times. He had no communication with the outside world. He did not know if he would ever be released. He did not know if the war would end. He did not know if anyone was coming. He survived. And when researchers later asked him who didn't survive, who were the men who died in captivity, not from physical wounds but from something internal, Stockdale said something that has become famous in leadership circles. He said, it was the optimists. The men who said, we'll be home by Christmas. And when Christmas came and they were still there. We'll be home by Easter. And when Easter came and they were still there, they broke. Not from torture. From the gap between expectation and reality. Stockdale survived because he held two things simultaneously, an unflinching acceptance of the brutal reality he was in, and an absolute conviction that he would eventually prevail. Not by Christmas. Not by Easter. Eventually. Researchers call this the Stockdale paradox. But underneath the academic framing is something ancient and simple. He used his pain as a teacher. He let it tell him the truth about where he was without letting it destroy his belief in who he would become. When the noise of pain arrives, and it will arrive, the question the trained mind asks is not, why is this happening to me? That question leads to nowhere worth going. The question the trained mind asks is, what is this trying to show me? Not every answer will be clean. Not every lesson will be obvious. Sometimes the only thing pain teaches you in the moment is that you are more resilient than you believed. That is enough. That is more than enough. Men who learn to sit with pain, not wallow in it, not perform it, not use it as an identity, but genuinely sit with it and ask it what it knows, these men become unbreakable. Not because nothing hurts them. Because everything that hurts them eventually builds them. Use pain as a teacher. Let it speak. And when it has said what it needs to say, release it. Not because you're over it. Because you've received the lesson. And the lesson, if you carry it forward, becomes the very thing that makes the next silence bearable. The 8th point, choose your inputs as if your life depends on it. Everything that enters your mind becomes part of the fabric of your thoughts. Every image, every conversation, every video, every headline, every opinion of every person you spend time with. It all goes in, and most men have never once considered what they are letting in and what it is doing to them. You cannot silence a mind that you are constantly filling with noise. There is a principle in computing: garbage in, garbage out. What you feed the system determines what the system produces. And the human mind is the most sophisticated system in the known universe, which means it is especially sensitive to the quality of its inputs. Consider what the average man fills his mind with in a single day. News designed to provoke outrage. Social media engineered to generate envy and comparison. Entertainment built around conflict, dysfunction, and the lowest impulses. Conversations with people who have never examined their own thinking. Arguments in comment sections with strangers who will never change their minds regardless of evidence. And then he wonders why he can't think clearly. Why the noise won't stop. Why he feels vaguely anxious even on good days. You are the average of what you consume. Not just the people around you, what you consume. The books. The media. The conversations. The environment. Seneca, the great Stoic philosopher who served as advisor to the Emperor Nero, a position of enormous danger that required extraordinary mental discipline, wrote to his friend Lucilius. Retiring to yourself as much as possible. Associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve. And then he added something the algorithm will never tell you. Shun the gatherings of men who are reckless and dissipated. Restlessness is the mark of an unsettled mind. Seneca was writing about his social environment. But the principle extends to everything. The man who wants inner silence must become extraordinarily deliberate about what he lets through the gates of his attention. This does not mean becoming a monk who reads nothing but philosophy. It means becoming conscious. It means asking before you click, before you scroll, before you engage. Will this make me clearer or more confused? Will this make me stronger or weaker? Is this building something or burning it down? It means choosing, wherever possible, inputs that illuminate rather than inflame. Books over feeds. Conversation over consumption. Silence over background noise. And when you do engage with difficult content, because a man must understand the world he lives in, engaging as an observer, not a passive absorber. Watching the mechanism without letting the mechanism run through you unchecked. The men whose minds are most quiet are often the most selective about what they allow in. Not because they are sheltered, but because they know what noise costs. They have done the accounting. They have measured what clarity is worth. And they have decided, with full intention, that their mind is not a garbage can. Yours doesn't have to be either. The 9th point, return. Always only return. Here is the final and most important truth about the art of silencing your mind: you will not achieve it once and keep it forever. This is not a destination. It is a practice. It is the practice of return. Your mind will lose its silence. Tomorrow, or next week, or in 6 months, something will happen: a crisis, a betrayal, a failure, a fear, and the noise will come back with the force of a storm. The thoughts will scatter. The ground will feel unsteady. The silence you built will seem like it was never there. And in that moment, the only thing that matters is this: you return. Not with perfection. Not with performance. Not with the need to look like a man who has it all together. You return, quietly, stubbornly, without drama, to the practice. To the breath. To the philosophy. To the question of what is yours to control and what is not. To the stillness that you have proven, through every previous return, is available to you. This is what Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, understood when he built an entire philosophy out of one core practice. He did not promise men that if they followed Stoicism they would never feel pain, never lose, never falter. He promised something rarer: a way back. Always a way back. Zeno had been a merchant, successful, comfortable, on his way to becoming wealthy. Then his ship sank. He lost everything. He washed up in Athens broke and broken. He wandered into a bookshop, found the writings of Socrates, and sat down on the floor and began to read. He did not go looking for philosophy. Philosophy found him in a wreck. And what philosophy gave him was not a way to avoid wreckage. It was a way to navigate it. A way to return, every time, to something stable inside himself that the sea could not touch. He built the Stoa, the school that would produce Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, and 1,000 other men who learned that the mind, properly disciplined, is the only home that cannot be taken from you. You will fail at this. That is not pessimism. That is the guarantee that you are a human being attempting something real. You will have days when the noise wins. When the thoughts overwhelm the practice. When the silence feels like a lie you told yourself in a better moment. Return anyway. Not because you're perfect. Because you're committed to becoming the man who, no matter how far he drifts from his center, always knows the way back. That is the art. Not the silence itself, the returning to it. Again and again and again, for the rest of your life, getting slightly faster each time, slightly calmer each time, slightly more certain with each return that the silence was always there, waiting, not for you to achieve it, but for you to remember it. The final word. You started this video with noise in your head. Maybe a little less now. Maybe the same. Maybe more, because the truth has a way of stirring what it's about to heal. What you've heard today is not new. Every great mind in history has circled these same truths, in different languages, under different skies, in different kinds of suffering. Epictetus in chains. Frankl in a death camp. Stockdale in a cage. Marcus Aurelius on a throne. Musashi alone in a cave. Pascal in a quiet room. Zeno in the ruins of a shipwreck. All of them found what you are looking for. Not because they were born different from you. Because they committed to the practice of return. The noise is not your nature. Silence is. Go find it. Go back to it when you lose it. And when you build something solid inside yourself, something the world cannot shake loose, you will understand why the ancient philosophers considered this the highest achievement a man could pursue. Not wealth. Not fame. Not power. Mastery of the self. That work begins now. And it never fully ends. And that is the point. If this reached something in you, if you felt something shift while watching this, subscribe to Inner Steel. This channel exists to build men from the inside out, through the philosophy and stories and principles that have stood the test of centuries. Every video is designed to give you something real. Something that stays. Inner Steel. Subscribe. And begin.